worth it, to paraphrase the former Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright. Now, I have to mention here the important fact that you bring up in this article, and that is that in 1995, when Saddam Hussein's son-in-law, Hussein Kamel, defected to Jordan, he was even interviewed on CNN, but he was completely debriefed, and I remember it, I watched it. He was completely debriefed by the CIA and the International Atomic Energy Agency and the all the different UNSCOM or UNMOVIC or whichever it was called at the time. And when he went home to Iraq and was executed by Saddam Hussein, Hussein panicked because he didn't know what all the son-in-law had said. And at that point, according to Scott Ritter, he gave up everything. He turned over every last thing, which proved that they hadn't produced any weapons, mass destruction, chemical weapons, or anything else since 1991, and that it was all accounted for other than, remainders and what's lost in the desert out there and past its shelf life anyway and whatever. And that was it. And they knew in 1995 that that was it. But now, since I got that out of the way, it's mentioned in the article. Everybody can go back and read it. If you have to correct me on something, I guess I'll let you. But otherwise, I want to just be quiet and let you talk about what you know about Iraq, because you were reporting from there during this time. And, I want to just hear 10 minutes of you telling the truth about Iraq during the Clinton years.
Well, it was what you had. I mean, Iraq, we shouldn't waste time sort of saying that Saddam was anything other than a really vicious, thuggish and stupid dictator who led his country into two disastrous wars. But I mean, Iraq. I remember in 1991, right after the first Gulf War. Actually, they called it the second because the war with Iran they considered the first Gulf War. And you had it was very interesting to see, horrifying too, to see a country which had a stable middle class, an incredibly sort of well-educated he was not a third world country. And suddenly this was coming apart. The auction rooms are full of people desperately trying to sell their family, the carpets from their houses. And gradually, every time I went back in the 1990s, you'd see people who'd, when in 1991 they'd been getting rid of one sort of, nice carpet that they didn't use much, and something by, a few years later, like all the carpets had gone, then all the silverware was gone, and then, the lamps had gone, and it was society was just stripped bare by sanctions. And there was one effect: people reduced to despair. Secondly, of course, it really promoted religious fundamentalism because people turned to Islam in the most extreme way. The people in the insurgency that the Americans faced, or particularly the religious insurgency, the Al Qaeda in Iraq that they faced, that in this decade and during the occupation, that was very much born out of the sanctions. That was a generation that had grown up in sanctions. With no hope, couldn't get married because you couldn't afford to get married, couldn't finish their education, couldn't even get an education. There was all the 1990s prepared all that and reduced Iraqi society to the way it is today. And it was a monstrous crime and done so sort of casually and brutally. I remember in 1991 talking to people from the CIA about the sanctions, and I said, you say in public that you hope this will lead to the people getting, rising up in despair and overthrowing Saddam. And they said, oh no, that's the least likely alternative. No, we don't expect that to happen at all. No, he's got too tight a grip. That won't happen. So it was completely cynical. They knew that this wouldn't affect Saddam. And they didn't care. They just wanted to keep Iraq ground down and the Iraqi people ground down so that Iraq would never be, a threat to American or Israeli or any friends' interests or Saudi Arabia ever again. And then, for his own balmy reasons, Bush went and invaded in 2003. But the ground had been well prepared, first of all by his father and then by Clinton.
Well, and isn't it interesting that none of the 9/11 hijackers were Iraqis, no matter how hard Dick Cheney and Scooter Libby and those guys and Israeli Mossad. I mean, they quoted them by name in the Sunday Times. The Mossad says they saw Iraqi intelligence give anthrax to Mohammed Atta, the lead hijacker. Yeah, right.
In Prague, crap. Yeah.
But the hijackers were actually all from countries that are occupied by the United States, particularly Saudi Arabia, which was occupied in order to do these sanctions. So it seems that the suicide terrorism, even under the worst kind of genocidal economic program and no-fly zone bombings on a regular basis, that still won't provoke suicide terrorism. But basing troops in a country in order to do that to the country next door, that will. Yeah.
That's right. 15 of the hijackers, 15 of the 19 were from Saudi Arabia. Exactly so. Well, that didn't work out too well, did it? Or maybe it did, who knows. But
it depends if you want a long war or not. But yeah, I mean, it's not, it's a fact for anyone who just goes to the PBS NewsHour website and reads the declarations of war by Osama bin Laden in 1996 and 98. Both of them, he spends quite a bit of time talking about what's going on in Iraq, the blockade.
Absolutely.
And on the eve of the Iraq War, at least supposedly, bin Laden put out a message saying, good luck to the people of Iraq, fight the Americans, and now's your chance to fight that evil socialist Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, that's right. That was exactly his attitude. I mean, he was, the idea that there would have been collusion between him and Saddam Hussein was a fiction so ludicrous that only, well, I didn't. Even the New York Times fell for that. The New Yorker magazine infamously did, but
Jeffrey Goldberg.
Exactly so.
Yeah,
which he's never apologized for.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I forgot what I was going to say. It was going to be a great point, but
yeah. Oh, I can sense that. Yeah.
Yes. Well, we're agreed then. Again, this article, Worth It, that you have in the London Review of Books, is a review of Invisible War: The United States and the Iraq Sanctions by Joy Gordon, and she really got the work done here about the effect on the people of Iraq. And it really is, I don't know, I can't help but think, Andrew, about, 50 years from now, if America doesn't use hydrogen bombs and kill all the people in the world between now and then, when people look back on this, a program of, hundreds of thousands killed in the Iran-Iraq war that we fought both sides of, the Anfal campaign under Saddam Hussein when he was our friend, and then the first Gulf War, the sanctions that killed 1 million, then the war that killed another 1 million. I mean, what America has done to this helpless little country over the last 30 years is the kind of thing that you could write a religious text about the horrible crisis. Like you said, people turning to fundamentalism. Like, I could see how, from other people's point of view, this is like a holy crusade, religious level war. It's madness. Millions killed.
Yeah, it's horrifying, just horrifying. And all done, people don't sort of, notice. I mean, how often do people talk about Iraq these days, I mean, I'm very glad we're doing this because people need to know, just what you just said. What, horrible things have been done in our name.
Tell me again, Andrew, why they wanted to do this to Iraq so bad anyway. I mean, why of all the helpless little countries in the world, why not just, bomb Argentina all day?
I think there was, part of the reason was, there was a whole host of reasons, a lot of which we probably don't know, but one of them was that Iraq was getting too big for its boots, in their view. Iraq was always an awkward country for them because Iraq, they particularly as far as, had all this oil, and yet Saddam Hussein had actually, it was Saddam who'd done it, had successfully nationalized Iraqi oil, or completed the nationalization of Iraqi oil. So that was, he was always a bit too independent for people's, for the ruling clique's taste. And then, especially after the Iran-Iraq war, it was like he was the strongest military power in that part of the Middle East. And the idea that it could actually possibly threaten, not just Kuwait, but Saudi Arabia. That was a bit scary for them. I think they wanted to take it down a peg or two. And then beyond that, there was this whole mad neocon plan that you could somehow, if you took over Iraq, you could then use that to take over Syria, and you'd have basically, the most important countries in the Middle East, or two of the most important countries, basically, subservient to America, i.e. Israel's desires.
Yeah. All right. Thanks very much, Andrew.
Okay, Scott. Take care.
Everybody, that's Andrew Cockburn, author of Rumsfeld, His Rise, Fall, and Catastrophic Legacy. The article in the London Review of Books is worth it. A review of Invisible War, the United States and the Iraq Sanctions by Joy Gordon.